For decades, Stevie Wonder's voice was pure light, a sound that healed, united, and gave hope to millions. But now, at 75, the man who gave the world so much joy is facing heartbreak few could imagine. Behind the music, behind the smile, lies a story of loss, sacrifice, and silent pain he carried for years. What happened to the legend whose songs define generations? The truth, long hidden, will break your heart and change how you see Stevie Wonder forever. Stevie Wonder's story began before the world ever saw him, and before he ever saw the world. He was born 6 weeks early in the small industrial town of Saginaw, Michigan, on May 13, 1950. His tiny body fought for life, wrapped in tubes and surrounded by the cold hum of hospital machines. The doctors did what they could, flooding the incubator with oxygen to keep him alive. It worked, but at a cruel cost. The overdose scarred his retinas and left him blind forever. He would never see the face of the mother who loved him more than life itself. Her name was Lula Mae Hardaway, a woman whose faith was stronger than her fear. When the doctors told her that her baby would never see, she wept softly, then whispered, "Then he will listen for God's voice instead." She raised him in poverty, in the broken streets of Detroit, where the nights were cold and the cupboards were often empty. His father, Calvin, drifted in and out of their lives, his pride lost to anger and drink. Eventually he walked away, leaving Lula with 6 children and no steady income. But she never gave up. Her hands, cracked and bleeding from cleaning other people's floors, built a home from almost nothing. At night, when hunger tried to creep into the children's dreams, she sang hymns to drown it out. Stevie would lie awake, listening to her soft, trembling voice. The rhythm of her hope became the first music he ever knew. He couldn't see the light, but he could feel it in her words, in her warmth, in the way faith filled their tiny apartment like a quiet fire. Detroit was loud and cold, but in its chaos, Stevie found a world of sound. He listened to the footsteps in the hallway, the buzz of streetlights, the rattle of trains, the way rain tapped against the glass like a secret code. Each sound was a color, each echo a shape. The world spoke to him in rhythm, and he understood. At church, while other children ran outside to play, Stevie sat by the organ, his small fingers tracing the keys like they were braille. The choir's voices became his sky, the drums his heartbeat, the clapping hands his sunlight. Every vibration built a picture in his mind, and that picture was alive with love, struggle, and faith. By the age of 9, he could play piano, harmonica, and drums, all by ear. No one had taught him formally. He learned by feeling, by trusting the unseen. "I may not have seen with my eyes," he would say years later, "but I've always seen with my heart." That heart, shaped by hardship and guided by his mother's strength, became his compass. It taught him that blindness was not his curse, it was his beginning. From darkness, he learned how to create light. From hunger, he learned compassion. From faith, he learned rhythm. And though he couldn't see the sun rise over Detroit, he could feel it every time he sang. Those early years carved the soul of a man who would one day teach the world to hear differently. His story didn't start with fame or applause. It began in silence. The silence of a mother's prayer, a child's heartbeat, and a faith strong enough to turn darkness into song. It started on a freezing day in Detroit when a small boy stood on a street corner, a dented harmonica pressed to his lips. His coat was too thin for the wind, his fingers cracked and red from the cold. But when he played, the world stopped. The sound that came out wasn't childish or simple, it was pure magic, raw and alive, like sunlight breaking through clouds. That boy was 11-year-old Stevie Wonder, and his music was about to change everything. Ronnie White, a member of the Motown group The Miracles, happened to walk by that day. He heard the music and froze in his tracks. He couldn't see where the sound was coming from at first. It was so clean, so full, that he thought it must be a recording. But then he saw the small blind boy with the harmonica, playing as if his soul was talking directly to heaven. Ronnie knew he had found something rare, something sacred. Within weeks, he brought Stevie to meet Berry Gordy, the man behind Motown Records, the label that had already begun to rewrite the story of American music. When Gordy heard Stevie play, he smiled and said softly, "That's a wonder." And just like that, the boy who had grown up in hunger and darkness was given a new name, Little Stevie Wonder. It was more than a nickname. It was a prophecy. The first time Stevie walked into the Motown studio, it wasn't glamorous or grand. The walls were patched with cardboard to keep out the winter air, and the floor creaked with every step. But to him, it was a cathedral. He could feel the heartbeat of the place, the thump of drums, the hum of guitars, the chatter of voices that sounded like laughter and possibility. He didn't need to see it to know it was special. At just 12 years old, he recorded his first album, The Jazz Soul of Little Stevie. The label was hesitant. He was young, untested, and blind, but when he began to play, everyone in the room fell silent. He didn't read sheet music, he felt it. Every note that left his fingers came straight from instinct. When he sang, it was with the voice of someone who had already lived 100 lives. Still, fame didn't come easily. He toured with the Motown Revue, a bus full of legends like Marvin Gaye and Smokey Robinson. The road was long and the nights were cold. Stevie was only 12, surrounded by adults, sleeping in cramped bunks, clutching his harmonica like a friend. He missed his mother, missed home, but when he stepped on stage, everything changed. The fear, the loneliness, it all melted away in the glow of the crowd. Then came the night that made history. During a live recording, he performed Fingertips, Part 2, an improvised jam session that exploded into pure electricity. The audience screamed, clapped, cried his name. He danced across the stage, harmonica blazing, drums pounding behind him like thunder. When the song ended, the crowd wouldn't stop cheering. They brought him back for an encore, and the tape kept rolling. That recording became his first #1 hit, making Stevie Wonder the youngest solo artist ever to top the Billboard Hot 100. He was 13. Overnight, little Stevie Wonder became a sensation. But fame is a strange thing. It shines bright and burns fast. As Stevie grew older, his voice began to change. The high, angelic tone that had carried him to stardom deepened, and suddenly, Motown didn't know what to do with him. The excitement faded. The calls stopped. People whispered that maybe his best years were already behind him. He could feel the doubt in the air whenever he walked through the studio hall. For the first time, Stevie felt real darkness, not the kind that came from blindness, but the kind that came from losing belief. Nights stretched long, his harmonica sat untouched, and he wondered if the world had stopped listening. But heaven wasn't finished with him yet. One evening, songwriter Sylvia Moy walked into the studio. She saw him sitting quietly at the piano, his hands still, his head down. "Play something," she told him. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. His fingers found the keys and began to move, slow at first, then with growing fire. What came out was Uptight Everything's All Right. A joyful, defiant, explosive sound that marked the rebirth of Stevie Wonder. That song was more than a comeback, it was a resurrection. Stevie was no longer the child prodigy from Motown's early days. He was becoming a true artist. Over the next few years, he took control of his own sound, his own voice, and his own destiny. He began to write his own music, blending soul, funk, jazz, and gospel into something completely new. In his late teens, he recorded My Chérie Amour, For Once in My Life, and signed, sealed, delivered, I'm Yours. Each song carried joy, heart, and truth. He wasn't just singing anymore. He was speaking to the world. His blindness, once seen as a limitation, became his strength. He heard music in ways no one else could. Layers of sound invisible to others but clear as day to him. By his early 20s, Stevie Wonder was no longer little Stevie. He was a force of nature. The boy who had once played for coins on a Detroit street corner had become a legend in the making. A man who turned pain into rhythm, silence into song, and faith into sound. He had proven that genius doesn't come from sight, it comes from vision, and Stevie Wonder's vision was limitless. Every note he played was a prayer, every melody a message. The miracle wasn't just his music, the miracle was him, a blind child who taught the world how to see with their hearts. Love came into Stevie Wonder's life like a song, sweet, bright, and full of promise. But just like a melody, it didn't always last the same way it began. Behind the fame, behind the glowing lights and applause, was a man who kept searching for something no amount of music could give him: peace, connection, and someone who saw the man, not the legend. The first great love of his life was Syreeta Wright, a fellow Motown artist with a voice like silk and a spirit that matched his own. They met in the studio, surrounded by instruments and dreams, and quickly became inseparable. Together they wrote songs that sounded like conversations between souls, soft, honest, full of hope. In 1970 they married, believing that their shared love for music could hold their lives together, and for a while, it did. Their apartment was filled with laughter, harmonies, and the hum of late-night songwriting. They were young, idealistic, and convinced that love could outsing fame, but fame has a way of pulling even the strongest hearts apart. Stevie's career was exploding, and the world demanded more of him than any one man could give. Tours stretched for months. Studio sessions ran through the night, and interviews filled every space in between. The distance grew quietly. They still loved each other, but their rhythms no longer matched. Syreeta had her own dreams too, and slowly, their lives began to drift in different directions. By 1972, they parted ways, gently, without bitterness, like a song that fades instead of ending. Stevie once said, "She was my mirror. I saw myself in her light." Their marriage ended, but their friendship never did. A few years later, love found him again. This time, not in the studio, but in the quiet moments between the chaos. Yolanda Simmons wasn't a singer or a celebrity. She worked in his Motown office, reading letters to him, making sure he ate, reminding him to rest. Their connection grew naturally, without pressure or performance. In 1975, she gave birth to their daughter, Aisha Morris. For Stevie, that moment changed everything. He often said that when he heard Aisha's first laugh, he finally understood what love really sounded like. That laugh became the heartbeat of his song, "Isn't She Lovely?" A joyful hymn of gratitude from a man who had spent his life in darkness and now felt the light of fatherhood for the first time. The world heard the music, but for Stevie, it was more than a hit. It was a love letter to his child, a piece of his soul turned into melody. Stevie and Yolanda had 2 children together, and for a while, their home was filled with warmth and music, but as his fame continued to grow, time once again became the enemy. The long nights, the endless tours, they took him away from the life he wanted to build. The bond began to fade, not from anger, but from exhaustion. They parted quietly, remaining connected through their children and the memories of the family they had built together. In 1979, a new chapter began when he met Melody McCulley. She brought calm into his life, something he hadn't felt in years. Their love wasn't wild or dramatic, it was gentle, healing. In 1983, they welcomed a son, Mumtaz. Stevie called him his quiet song. He often brought him into the studio, letting the boy fall asleep to the hum of keyboards and the soft rhythm of unfinished melodies. "Fatherhood taught me to listen," he said once, "not just to music, but to life." But love, like sound, can change with time. The demands of fame, the pressure to always be Stevie Wonder, eventually wore down even the calmest relationships. Melody drifted away, and though their time together ended, she left behind peace. The kind that doesn't fade when love does. The 1980s brought him success, wealth, and endless recognition, but also loneliness. Behind the stage lights, Stevie often sat in silence, longing for connection that wasn't built on fame. Then came Angela McAfee, a young woman who cared for him not as an icon, but as a man. She became his anchor for more than a decade, tending to him with patience and faith. She reminded him to take his medicine, labeled his kitchen jars in Braille, and whispered small prayers before bed. Their love wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and deeply human. For 13 years they built a life together, full of care and devotion. But even the gentlest love can break under the weight of time. The long absences, the demands of his career, the silence between tours, it all began to pull them apart. When she finally left, she didn't slam the door. She just folded his shirts, packed her suitcase, and walked away. Stevie said later, "Some goodbyes don't echo, they just sink." It was one of the hardest losses of his life, not because it ended in anger, but because it ended in fatigue. Years later, when asked about her, Stevie didn't speak with regret, but with gratitude. "She loved me more than I knew how to love back," he said quietly. That single sentence carried the weight of all his heartbreak. A man who had given the world so much emotion in his songs, but sometimes struggled to hold on to it in real life. Through all the love and loss, Stevie never grew bitter. Each relationship left behind a different kind of light, a lesson, a memory, a melody. Love gave him his greatest songs and his deepest scars, but he never stopped believing in it. To him, love wasn't just romance, it was faith, forgiveness, and the small moments that make life worth living. He once said, "I've had many loves, but every one of them was a note in my song." And maybe that's what his story really is. A symphony built from love that burned bright, love that faded, and love that healed. Even after all the heartbreak, Stevie Wonder kept singing. Not because love never hurt him, but because, in his heart, love was still the truest sound of all. As the years went by, Stevie Wonder began to slow down. Not because the music inside him faded, but because his body finally asked for rest. After decades of touring, recording, and carrying the weight of being a living legend, he started to feel what time does to even the strongest souls. The rhythm that had once guided him through life began to change. Yet even as age crept in, Stevie found something far more precious than fame or applause. He found peace, the quiet kind that hums in the heart when you've lived long enough to understand what truly matters. The first signs of decline came quietly. Fatigue that lasted longer than it used to, breath that came a little shorter after each performance, headaches that refused to fade. He had lived through so much: a near-fatal car accident, decades of pressure, long nights under studio lights, and endless travel. His body had been a vessel for music, but it had paid the price. By his late 60s, doctors warned him that his kidneys were failing. It was a slow, invisible battle, one that didn't make headlines at first. But for Stevie, who had always believed in facing life with faith, it became another test of strength. In 2019, he stood before an audience in London and, with his calm, warm voice, shared the news himself. "I'm going to have surgery," he said, "and I have a donor. I'm blessed." There was no fear in his tone, no sadness, only gratitude. The crowd stood in silence, some in tears, others in awe. Even in illness, Stevie carried himself like a man made of grace. He didn't see his condition as punishment. He saw it as a reminder that life, even when fragile, was still a gift. After the transplant, recovery came slowly. There were long nights in the hospital, the steady hum of machines, the smell of disinfectant and prayer. His wife Tomika never left his side. She held his hand through every moment, whispering encouragements when his strength waned. "You're still my miracle," she told him once, her voice trembling but steady. When he finally opened his eyes after surgery, weak but alive, his first words were, "Am I still here?" And she smiled through tears. "You never left." That moment marked the start of a new chapter, not one of stages and spotlights, but of quiet gratitude. Stevie began to live differently. Gone were the endless tours and sleepless nights. Instead, his mornings started with sunlight falling across the piano in his Los Angeles home, his children's laughter echoing down the hall. He spent more time in the garden with Tomika, more time listening than speaking. The man who had once filled the world with sound had learned the beauty of silence. He still played, but now his music was gentler. Not for fame, not for charts, but for himself. Sometimes neighbors said they could hear faint piano notes drifting through the Bel Air air at dusk, soft and slow, like prayers turned into melody. When asked about it in an interview, he smiled and said, "I don't chase perfection anymore. I just thank God for breath. That's music enough." But Stevie's life has never been just about survival. It's been about giving. Over the years, he has donated millions to humanitarian causes. Education for children with disabilities, hunger relief, disaster aid, and scholarships for young musicians. In 1985, he helped create "We Are the World," the song that raised over $60 million, 0 cents, for famine relief in Africa. When asked why he gives so much, he always answers the same way: "Because someone once gave me love when I had nothing else." His philanthropy didn't come from guilt or image, it came from gratitude. He understood what it meant to grow up hungry, unseen, and struggling. That memory never left him, even after he became one of the richest musicians alive. With an estimated net worth of $200 million, 0 cents, he could have lived a life of endless luxury. Instead, he chose something simpler: comfort, family, and purpose. His home in Bel Air is grand, yes, a 20,000 square foot mansion with sweeping staircases, marble floors, and a garden filled with color he cannot see but still feels. He once said that light has a texture, and he can sense it in the air. The house hums with life, children playing, music spilling from open windows, and the faint laughter of the woman who stood by him through illness and age. It's not a palace of fame, it's a sanctuary of peace. Every corner of it tells a story. There's a grand piano under a skylight, placed so that the morning sun touches the keys. He can't see the light, but he feels the warmth as he plays. In another room, his awards. Grammys, medals, and honors sit quietly on shelves. Among them is the Presidential Medal of Freedom, given to him by Barack Obama in 2014. But when asked which award means the most, he doesn't point to any of them. Instead, he gestures toward a framed photo of his mother, Lula. "That's my real medal," he says softly. The loss of his mother was one wound that never fully healed. She had been his anchor, his first teacher, the one who told him he was made for something special. When she passed away in 2006, something in his music went still. For weeks he couldn't touch the piano. When he finally did, he played Ribbon in the Sky for her, alone, in a dark room, tears falling silently. He said later, "When she left, I lost the first sound I ever loved, her voice. Yet, even in death, he felt her near. Sometimes," he told an interviewer, "I still hear her humming with me." That belief, that love never dies, only changes form, became the foundation of Stevie's peace. He no longer fears time or illness. Instead, he embraces them as reminders that everything beautiful in life comes with an ending, and that endings, too, can be sacred. "Pain," he once said, "is proof that you're still alive. It means love was real." Today, at 75, Stevie Wonder lives not in the roar of fame, but in the whisper of gratitude. His days are simple: breakfast with his family, walks in the garden, quiet moments at the piano. He no longer needs a stage to be heard. His life itself has become his final song, one written in resilience, faith, and love. Sometimes, when the evening light fades and the world around him grows still, he plays a soft melody that trails into silence. It's not for an audience, it's for the life he's lived. The darkness he turned into music, the pain he turned into prayer. Stevie Wonder's legacy is not just in his songs, but in what they taught us: that light doesn't need eyes to shine, and peace isn't found in applause, but in the quiet gratitude of still being here.